Bienvenidos. My name is Isabella Legaspi, and I'm the current president of the Latin American Business Club. It is a pleasure to be here with you all today. First off, I want to thank Ricardo Ernst and his team at the Latin American Leadership Program, Cristina Ruiz, Luna Zuluaga, and Christopher Critchfield from MSB Tech. I would also like to extend my gratitude to my supportive colleagues at the Latin American Business Club. Above all, I want to thank the Latin American board members, Manuel Balbontin and Myriam de la Vega, who have so generously accepted to join us at our first annual conference. In such unprecedented times, we are thankful for this community and for having the opportunity to come together. 2 years ago, I sat down with our current vice president, Micaela Rank, to discuss a potential idea for a new club at Georgetown. Our vision, based off of an organization at Boston College, was to create a Latin American business club, a pre-professional platform for Latinos interested in seeking business-related opportunities. This club would create a greater awareness of the social and political issues facing Latin America and its people, in addition to connecting its members to fellow Latino students and alumni. After rigorous planning, thousands of WhatsApp messages, and a bombardment of emails, we finally succeeded at creating a community at Georgetown. Today, LABC proudly holds 15 board members and 48 general members. Throughout the past 2 years, we've organized numerous events, including a resume and cover letter building workshop, 3 student-led industry series discussing the ins and outs of recruiting, social events, and 2 future recruiting events with Morgan Stanley Capital Markets and Citi Investment Banking. The annual conference is the crux of LABC, which is why we are so grateful to share this momentous occasion with you all. Through this event, we hope to bring together the leaders of the Latin American business world and hear their insights about critical issues affecting the region. Today, we are so pleased to welcome Professor Ernst and Latin American board members Myriam de la Vega and Manuel Balbontin to discuss how to create shared value and foster public-private partnership for the advancement of Latin American economies. Manuel Balbontin, born and raised in Chile, is the current chairman of the Latin American board at Georgetown. He is a partner and founder of the Compass Group, the executive chairman of Compass Group Holdings, and a senior investment strategist. Prior to founding the Compass Group, he served as a managing partner and founder of the New World Investments Group at Banco Santander in New York. Mr. Balbontin also served as the director of capital markets and co-director of sales and trading at Citicorp Emerging Markets Group. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile and an MBA from Harvard Business School. And he is a proud father to 2 Joyas, Ana Balbontin, class of 2018, and Santiago Balbontin, class of 2025. Myriam de la Vega, originally from Chihuahua, Mexico, is the managing director and CEO of Almacenes Distribuidores de la Frontera and independent non-executive director of Fresnillo. She is also the managing director of Maximos Inmobiliaria and co-founder and major stockholder of Domino's Pizza Ciudad Juárez and Altec Purificación. She serves on the board of Citibanamex and is vice president of Coparmex Nacional. Ms. de la Vega is on the regional board of Banco de Mexico, as well as on the board of Paso del Norte Health Foundation. She is a shareholder and board member of Juárez Football Club, Bravos Mayor Soccer League team. And de la Vega serves on the board of Fundación del Empresario Chihuahuense, the Museo del Barrio New York, ITESM, and ISAC. She holds a bachelor's degree and an MBA from the University of Texas, Austin. And she is a proud mother to 1 Joya, Camila Navarro de la Vega, class of 2025. Ricardo Ernst serves as the Barada Chair in Global Business, the Professor of Operations and Global Logistics, and former Deputy Dean of the McDonough School of Business. Mr. Ernst was born in Venezuela and holds a civil engineering degree from the Universidad Católica Andrés Bello and an MBA from the Instituto de Estudios Superiores de Administración de Venezuela. He received a master's degree and a PhD from the Wharton School. His research focuses on the strategic analysis of logistics systems at both macro and micro levels. He has consulted with several national and international firms, such as General Motors, FEMSA, and Walmart. He is also a frequent speaker in international conferences and executive seminars and has a weekly editorial commentary in CNN Spanish. Ernst is a proud father to 3 Joyas, Felipe Ernst, class of 2014, Alejandro Ernst, class of 2017, and Sofia Ernst, class of 2025. And he has just published his latest book, From Me to We, How Shared Value Can Turn Companies into Engines of Change, which he will be discussing with us today. I will now give the floor to Professor Ernst. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. One of the most important things in my new CV, that was a short version, but the most important part of my CV now, is that I am an honorary member of the B frat as the newsman. Am I not the newsman? Who gives you the news better than me? Is there anybody here that gives you the news better than me? Anyway, all right. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Micaela, and the Latin American Business Club for organizing this event. And we're very happy to see more events at Georgetown related to the region of the world I am personally and emotionally attached, Latin America. The launch of the Georgetown Americas Institute, which I hope all of you know, as the umbrella for all of our initiatives centered on Latin America, and the kickoff of the GCL 16th graduation or 16th cohort is definitely an indication of how the university has positioned itself to play a pivotal role at some of the crucial crossroads between the countries in Latin America. Let's remember that the region is home to 663 million. And in the United States, with 333 million citizens, 62 million are of Hispanic descent. So we are making a very important participation in the world, at least in this part of the hemisphere. The topic of our conference today is a very important one. It's private-public partnerships. It's a topic that I deeply, deeply believe in. And it relates to the need for everybody to put their countries ahead of their own interests. Let me just share with you a few statistics so you understand what we're talking about. Latin America and the Caribbean represent 8.4% of the world population, but register 28.7% of the global deaths from COVID-19. So it's a disproportionate why we are just 8% and we have so many deaths. 209 million people in poverty and 78 million in extreme poverty. Just to talk in percentages, 33.7% and 12.5% of the total population. Latin America and the Caribbean is the most in-debt region in the developing world, 79% of the GDP. There are some good news, though. The good news is there is a lot of young people. 24% of the population is between 0 and 14 years old, so there's some hope in there. Before we get into the interesting conversation of our panel discussion on the importance and value of the private-public partnerships for the region, I am honored to present to you my latest book, From Me to We. So this is a presentation. I would like to just tell you what is the motivation, what goes behind the book, and hopefully, if I'm successful, then you'll end up buying the book. If not, just give me a call. But anyway, seriously speaking, this is From Me to We, and this is the main message of the book. How share value can turn companies into engines of change. It's a new way of looking at the world. I will explain to you how I came to think about all that. It's a book that I wrote with a very good friend of mine, Jerry Haar. The core of our message, this is like the cliff notes of the book. The core of our message in the From Me to We is the following. You need to change the view from shareholder into stakeholder. How do you change into what's in it for me into what's in it for us? And actually, what is very fascinating, I have found that is a concept that your generation embraces more significantly than my generation. And then I was very, very intrigued by what is behind all this. So point number one, from a shareholder's view to a stakeholder's view, embracing a very important concept that is called share value. Second is that there are two important components in this view, and that is the proper implementation of accountability and ownership. In other words, whatever you do, you need to feel that you are accountable, and to a certain extent, you should feel that you're an owner into what you're doing. And then finally, we would like to obtain, through this approach, what I call the full share responsibility. So it goes more than top down, it should be coming both ways. So that is the overall cliff notes of what I'm going to be delving now in some detail. So let's get into some basic ideas to motivate what I'm talking about. We are in the business school, and I have been here a long time. I've been at Georgetown for 35 years, and as I like to say, I have been here more years than some of you have of age. Just think about it. So I was here when none of you were not even in the horizon of your parents. And even then, we were talking about this stuff. Now, the concept has evolved, and that's what I want to demonstrate to you. So those of you that have been at Georgetown for enough time, if I ask you, what is the number one objective of every company? What would you say? This is the part where you give an answer. It's not that I'm just talking by myself. Number one objective of any company? Profit. Make money? How many of you think make money is the number one objective of a company? Very good. All right. So let's keep pushing. That's the number one objective. What is the number two objective of every company? Give employment. Give employment. All right. Any other thoughts for number two objective of any company? I would say that the number two objective of any company is to make more money. We agree? Number one objective is to make money. And number two, make more money? All right, so if you want to help the employees because you want to make more money. All right, let's continue this. What is the number three objective of any company? Make more money. You see, you are like a very simple-minded people. I knew that. So the number one objective of any company is to make money. We agree? Number two, make more money. And number three, make even more money. Well, but you know, in business schools, we like to put frameworks into the thinking. So we cannot say that because that's not sophisticated enough. So this is what we say. Simple rule. Objective number one, to make money. Objective number two, make more money. And then objective number three, make sure that objectives one and two are always satisfied. So you see, that is a very simple way of understanding the world. But let me tell you the truth of this. I was playing this simple joke for many, many years, and then everybody understood it. But after like 10 years ago, I started getting from students that is very funny, but it's not very accurate. Like, this is not true in your generation. Your generation is looking for something more than just making money. And then I started thinking, well, is it really true? So I started digging into the whole thing. And then that's when we came into the notion that there must be something more than just making money. And there is something more than just making money, then what is that? What is this thing that you guys want to do? So let's go into some accepted facts. Things that we are not going to argue because that's the way they are. One is, only business can create economic prosperity. If you don't have business, then it's very difficult. Number two, well, when businesses act as business, not as charitable donors, then everybody wins. Number three, social deficits is something that your generation is very much into this, then create economic costs. So we are talking about the environment, we are talking about all these other things that many of you are concerned about. Communities are something that also affects many people. We say that community weaknesses affect company productivity, okay? Social needs represent the largest unserved market opportunity. And those are things that I have appreciated from your generation. There is a growing congruence between economic value creation and societal objectives. All right, so far so good. And that's how we came from the me, what's in it for me, into what's in it for we. And that is the me to we notion. Now let me give you another example so you understand what I'm getting at. When eating pizza, you're going to Leo's. I know many of you don't like Leo's, but let's assume you're going to Leo's to eat pizza. Is that possible? No, but let's assume. So you go to Leo's to eat pizza. So when you're eating pizza, you get your slice. Yes? Now let's assume that you want more pizza. So what do? There's only one way. Well, you grab more, correct? So you grab another piece of the pizza. So if you grab another piece of the pizza, then you're taking away from the others eating with you. Make sense? Well, there is another option into this. Why not make a bigger pizza? You can enlarge the size of the pie. If you enlarge the size of the pie, then more will eat, and you still get your 2 slices, but more can eat. Are you following the rationale of this game? That's what we're trying to say. How can you actually embrace the new challenge? The new challenge is not to redistribute the pie, but to enlarge it and advance a model of free market capitalism that is more inclusive, more compassionate, and anchored in more than the bottom line. That's what I realized. We came to the realization that that is the new challenge. How do you do that? That's what we're going to be talking about. So that is the challenge that we want to cover in the book. So just to give you an example, imagine that I'm now this great guy that I would like to help people, and I would like to start like taxi service. It's not what I would do, but let's assume. I started taxi service, so how would the taxi service work? Well, first I need drivers to drive the taxi for me. So by doing that, I'm giving an opportunity to give employment and help people. Very nice of my part. Then I need to buy cars for potential employees. And that is what we call share value. I'm sharing the value of what I'm doing. However, there are two important questions. Think about it. I want to get into the taxi thing. I'm going to hire drivers. I'm going to buy the cars for them so they start working with me and for me. So far, so good? Working for me, with me. But there are two important questions in this business that we haven't answered yet. Question number one, who takes care of the car through regular maintenance and upkeep? Is it something that I should do or the driver should do? Who should do that? Me or the driver? There are only two possible answers, me or the driver. Who should be doing that? How many of you think I should be taking care of that? How many of you think that the driver should be taking care of that? Well, you see, it's a mixed reaction, so we know who's who in this crowd. But in any event, bottom line is that that is what we call accountability. Who is responsible for taking care of the car? Now, the second one is who truly should own the taxi? Is it me or is it them? Should they feel like they are the owners of the taxi? And that's what we call ownership. So we argue that if we can convince the drivers that to a certain extent they're accountable for taking care of the car, and at the same time they should feel like owners of the car, then we have obtained a lot. What we have obtained is the me to we. They are part of my ecosystem, and they are, in theory, more motivated, more productive, work longer hours, and pick up more rides. So that is what we are thinking should be doing. Well, this type of employee empowerment can still, we believe, greater trust in leadership, encourage employee motivation, lead to greater creativity, and improve employee retention, all of which ultimately results in a better and more sustainable bottom line. Now, if you think that I am making up a situation, let's think about Uber. How many of you use Uber? That's a rhetorical question, I know. All of you, as an Uber investor, I appreciate your contribution. But anyway, seriously speaking, think of Uber for a second. How does that work? What is the model of Uber? Ownership, every driver is an owner, correct? Accountability, every ride gets stars and reviews. And that is how you are doing that with Uber. So they are actually implementing the model that we are advocating, and we believe it is a true full share responsibility. And that's why we argue Uber is doing so well. Uber is doing amazing. It's a company that is going all over, 20 million weekly trips, 60 countries, 40 million riders using the app weekly, 3 million drivers. So there you see how these concepts get applied. Now, the whole point is a very important shift. And the very important shift is what's in it for me into what's in it for us. And that is what we are advocating, from me to we. So far, so good? So I'm going to get into a little bit of the foundation of this. Let's start by revisiting some fundamentals of what we're doing, where is it coming from. And one of the important questions that we are asking is, what is the role of business in society? Do we have any moral responsibility other than making money? And that is what we start exploring. Are we the first ones doing this? No, we're not the first ones, but we are leveraging into what others have done by adding into the elements of that model. So for centuries, business have been asking, guiding question, what's in it for me? Then we are advocating should be what's in it for us. But we argue at the end of the day that the me to we is the new normal for business in the 21st century, driven by your generation, which an implied switching cost that is minimized by the proven benefits as we did with Uber. Now, this is the traditional business ecosystem. You have a core business, it's an extended enterprise, and then from there you go to a business ecosystem. So you need to start thinking about all the players. It's not just what's in your company. Now, should companies only strive to maximize shareholder value or try to serve the interests of all stakeholders? That is the fundamental question. And there have been two people thinking about it. And then I'm not going to bother you too much, but there are two men that have been doing this. One is Milton Friedman. And Milton Friedman said the only social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. And then there's another one, his close cousin, my name is Ed Freeman, and he says, no, you should be looking at the stakeholders. So we are basically debating who's right in the whole process, from me to we. So from shareholders to stakeholders, that's what we're selling. You need to open your view of the world and going from shareholders to stakeholders, because all shareholders are stakeholders, but not all stakeholders are shareholders. So me is just you, while the stakeholders are the customers, the government, the employees, the NGOs, universities, and so on and so forth. So how is all this connected to capitalism, which is at the foundation of all the things we're talking, making money, business, this, that, and the other? Well, there has been an evolution, and the evolution has been very much straightforward. From the shareholder capitalism, that's the Milton Friedman view, into the state capitalism, and that's something very interesting and very new. That's what China does. China is not a communist country. China is a state capitalism, where you have a government that is actually managing the way they make money. So entrusts the government with setting the direction of the economy and has risen to prominence in many emerging markets, the best representative being China. And then the last one is the one we're advocating, and that is what we call stakeholder capitalism. What is a stakeholder capitalism saying? Well, we position private corporations as trustees of society. So that is something that has been around in the World Economic Forum. They have been talking about these things. And the social impact, I mean, this thing to being concerned about the world is nothing new. The most simple way of taking care of the society is philanthropy. You want to give money by being nice, and the charity, and so on and so forth. We think that charities are not sustainable, because charity, when you are bad times, then you're just cutting the charity. So the first thing that came after the philanthropy was the corporate social responsibility that many of you have heard before. Now, the next level of that is the share value. And share value is when you put a business model. You need to make it sustainable. And that is the important thing about it. So what exactly is share value? Well, it's the intersection between corporate performance and the society. That is what share value is all about. It's not enough to just consider what is good for the company, what simultaneously serves society as well. That's what it is. The two that came with this original concept were Michael Porter and Kramer. So I guess many of you have seen them. Those of you that are at MSB, you know who Michael Porter is. So business must reconnect company success with society, and it's not on the margin of what companies do, but at the center. So how do you do that? Well, profit is not inconsistent with positive social impact. That's what we should be looking for, and share value is pushing for a business model. So these two guys, Porter and Kramer, they basically have three basic ideas of how you do it. The way they suggest how you do it is first by reconceiving needs, by reconceiving products. You have a better packaging, you have less plastic, and so on and so forth. Then another way of doing is by redefining the value chain. You have all kinds of norms. And then the third is by helping communities. So let's say all of you that eat chocolate. Chocolate, main raw material is cocoa. Cocoa comes from the Ivory Coast. It comes from the Ivory Coast. You have communities that actually the ones that develop or just farm the cocoa. So how do you help those communities? So the share value will say, we help you. By helping you, we're helping all of us, and that's share value. Now, we argue that there is something missing in all that story. And what is missing is, first, what is the direction of the relationship? Is it one way or two ways? Is it top-down or bottom-up? And then we say philanthropy is clearly a one-way and clearly top-down. Customer social responsibility is a more subtle one-way and top-down. And then you have the share value, an improved one-way, but still top-down. So philanthropy, one way. Corporate social responsibility, one way. Share value, one way. But me to we, two ways. See? So I need to make a turn so it will be fixated in your head. It takes like 3 minutes to do this overhead, so PowerPoint is my middle name, so I wanted you to see how these things are changing. You get this? Did you see how it's turning? No, you missed it. I'm going to show it to you again. Look, it's turning. Did you get it? No, I don't think you got it. One more time. So you see, it's a two-way relationship. Are you getting it? So this is our main message of the whole thing. Now, so we introduced the two concepts. I'm not going to bother you with the two concepts. The two concepts, if you want to know more about the concept, get the book. But in any event, seriously speaking, the two concepts are accountability and ownership. Ownership and accountability is what we argue are the two elements missing in the Porter and Kramer model. So ownership, there are obligations. And that's why you need to have some ownership. I give you the taxi, you have some obligations with this taxi that I'm giving to you, within the persons in related to the object. And then the ownership, in the book, we just go through the different elements that define what ownership is all about. And then accountability, the other one, is an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility. And then we also, obviously, in the book, go through the different elements. I'm not going to bother you too much with what it means. But these two concepts are what we argue are what will add to what we call the quintet of me to we. So we have the three ideas from Porter and Kramer, and then we introduce the accountability and ownership to actually bring what we call the full circle of shared responsibility. So we are leveraging on that model to bring it to the next level and create the way it works. Now, there are many companies doing that, and I hope that you can get into the details of this because it's fascinating. And look at the type of companies we're talking about. You're going from Nestle to Dow to Mars to Novartis to Intel to technologies. So all the companies that are embracing or have the potential of embracing these companies are definitely getting a very, very interesting opportunity. So that is the core of our message, from shareholder to stakeholder with shared value, through ownership and accountability to obtain full shared responsibility. So let me just give you another familiar example so you see that this is not just as crazy as it might seem at the beginning. Especially after spring break, this example will be very, very familiar with you. And the company that I will show you to illustrate is Airbnb. How many of you use Airbnb during your spring break? Well, there you go. So what is the idea of Airbnb? Are they following our concepts? Yes, they are. Ownership. Every homeowner is an owner. Accountability. Every rent gets stars and reviews. And therefore, we argue it is a true full share responsibility. So Airbnb, very successful company, and you see how they're implementing these things to actually make it work. So to finalize, or to finish with our message, so enlarging the size of the pie, that's what we are advocating. That's very important. So I changed from a pizza now that we are at the end. So this is dessert. So this is your apple pie. And then by enlarging the size of the pie, you can make it all better with the me to W. So that is basically what we are exploring in the book in a lot of detail. And it gives me the segue to our panel discussion. Because one of the easy, good ways of implementing the me to we is no other than with the public-private partnerships. Is one way in which you can actually implement, execute, and embrace the concept that we're talking about. So how can you move into a win-win situation through the me to we? That's what we're going to be talking next in our panel, which is, I'm sure, the only reason you came here is to listen to the panel. I was just an entertainer. I'm like the warmer of the concert. So anyway, guys, that is the book. And now I'm going to shift gears and get into the P2P. Let me invite to the podium my friends. Okay.
I have bad news for you.
Which are?
You are not going to sell any book now. It was so clear that nobody needs to buy the book now.
No, but you don't understand this. They have a very short memory. You know, I know them well. And they have short memories, so you need to get it to revisit. All right, guys, turning into the panel, it is my true and serious, complete and absolute privilege to share the stage with Manuel Balbontin and Pita de la Vega. Their CVs, as were introduced at the beginning, are extensive to read it. Both with ample experience doing business in the region, and that's why you are fortunate to listen what they have to say. They're true representatives of one of the P's in the triple private-public partnerships. But in addition to their incredible CV, their most important claim to fame is that they are parents of GU Shining Stars. So the shining stars are here probably hiding somewhere because it's not cool to be like here, but I have the same problem, so don't worry about it. I am convinced. Yeah, you know, because they're all in hiding saying, oh my God, what are they going to say? Guys, it's okay. Nobody really remembers this, so don't worry about it. So, you know, it's easy. So. Right, guys? Let's forget about them. Let's assume we're having our conversation. Let's forget they're there. So, I'm convinced that shared value as a concept enlarged with the me to we framework can foster private-public partnerships for the advancement of Latin America. In fact, as I mentioned before, there's an entire chapter in the book dedicated to PPPs. I would like to start by defining the private-public partnerships so we are all on the same page, and at the same time introduce the term formally for the audience. Because, you know, just for you to know what exactly is the definition of a PPP. The term public-private partnership describes a range of possible relationships among public and private entities in the context of delivering infrastructure and other services. These are the characteristics of a PPP. It's a long-term contract between a public implementing agency and a private sector company. For a public interest project that is under the responsibility of a state agency, which transfers substantial risk to the private party, includes private financing, and includes focus on the specifications of project outputs rather than project inputs, with payment based on performance. So it's a different game what the PPPs are all about. It can be different sectors and, you know, all the elements where that applies. As true representatives of the private P of the public-private partnership, what is your opinion of the PPPs? Either one can jump in.
Well, I think it's a marvelous vehicle we're falling short in the investments that we need to do. All the countries are falling short, and mostly in Latin America. We're spending, you're supposed to spend about 5% of GDP in infrastructure, and we're spending less than half of that. So every year we lag behind more. And this is a wonderful vehicle if we get everything, all the stakeholders, you know, we're in the place where they should be, and if we can find the projects and organize all the parties involved, it's a marvelous way to get the roads and the hospitals, even jails, and all the water infrastructure that we need. I think it's a very important for Latin America to use these vehicles.
To have this.
Yes, absolutely.
If you look at Latin America, just to give you some statistic, which Peter gave you some governments spend around 3% or 2 and change percent in total investments, of which a third of that goes to infrastructure. And that means around 1%, which is not enough. Infrastructure is crucial for the development of these economies. In order to get that to the 5 or 7 or whatever percent that people believe is necessary and compare with what other regions in the world are doing, clearly you need somebody else to contribute to that. So from a standpoint of me to we, as you mentioned it, it's fundamental that these partnerships exist. If not, Latin America, that already invests too little, this 2.5 to 3% that Peter just mentioned, it would do less than half of that. It was just public investment. It's not enough. It needs to be done. It needs more that needs to be done. But it's clearly something that is fundamental in this equation. And why it's fundamental? Because if the countries do not invest in infrastructure, the countries don't grow. You don't have roads, you don't have ports, you don't have airports, you don't have hospitals, you don't have schools, you don't have water sewage facilities. So all those are infrastructure projects that improves the quality of life, improves the mobility of the population, and improves the competitiveness of all these countries. And that is critically in this discussion.
Thank you. Actually, a very important statistic. I don't know if you registered the statistic. You know, infrastructure needs to be improving. Otherwise, you're not up to par with the world. And then, you know, it means like highways, ports, airports, and so on and so forth. And then the gap the infrastructure gap in Latin America is they should be investing at least 5%. 5% of the GDP in the region should be investing to actually catch up. And then currently, they are only investing half of that. So if they're not investing that much, then when is Latin America going to catch up? Are we always going to be behind? So the question is, if we really believe in the PPPs as a vehicle for catching up, then that's something that needs to be explored in more detail. However, as we all know, there is some kind of a bad relationship between the private sector and the public sector. I mean, the private sector most of the time doesn't want to join the public sector, and then they look at the public sector with some hesitancy, and then the same thing happens from the public sector looking at the private sector. There is some kind of a mistrust. We don't trust the public sector, and the public sector doesn't trust the private sector. Why is that? Why? And you see a country like the US where we can say whatever, but at the end of the day, there is a higher level of trust between the public and the private sector. Why in Latin America we have such an incredible divide between the public and the private sector?
I think there's a very uncomfortable truth at the heart of this question, and it is how calcified Latin American social structures are. The private sector has a tendency to act feudally, how do you say feudally? And where families build business conglomerates, and they pass down decision-making power along with wealth only through family. So we become very easy and natural target for politicians with a knack for political sentiment. Politicians, on the other hand, come from political classes or in coalitions, and they have never spent time working in the private sector. They've never worried about making payroll or having the problem of having to fire somebody because they can't, pay them. And so they have no sensitivity to the problems of private sector and end up creating so many more problems for us. There's also rivalry, corruption, opaque rules, and uncertainty on their part. They perceive, on the other part, they perceive us as voracious. So I think more than in other parts of the world, in Latin America, we have this. You don't see it as much in the States, so we are we're in a difficult position. We distrust each other. And I think we need to find a way to work this out so we can have our PPPs work. And it can be done. We just have to, have a common goal and really want our projects and have really good leadership for it to work. We are in separate, and it's making it more and more difficult. I see it, for example, in Mexico. The distrust is only getting worse. We're more polarized than ever. And so if we had, I think I read in what you sent us that in Mexico we had $163 billion worth of projects, PPP projects. This year it's like, there's like 2 or 3 only that are going on ahead. So we're not advancing, and we do need it, because if not, we're, like you say, we're staying more and more behind in infrastructure spending. But I think it's really serious the way we are doing it. It's a social structure, and it's things that we do need to change. And I think it's them that are going to change it. The younger people, the way they do it, yes, and leveling the fields, giving more opportunities to people, so we're not as polarized.
Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are many aspects regarding politics, regarding corruption, but there are serious issues with the way many of these PPPs have been developed in the region. If you think about what a PPP means, is the government gives the private sector a way of developing a project, and the private sector has to repay that project some way or another. And there are different models. There is the concession model,
correct,
where 100% of the recovery of the money comes from charging some kind of fee, a toll in a toll road, or an airport fee, or any kind of fee, or water prices if it's a water cleaning services or water producing plant, and then everything has a cost. The problem with that model, which have been applied in one of the most successful countries in Latin America doing this, is Chile, it's that 100% of the price of the project really gets paid by these tolls or these prices. So not only you have to pay for the maintenance of the toll or the road has to be maintained, the water plant has to be maintained, but also you have to recover all the cost. And therefore you have very expensive toll roads. And if you compare with the toll road on the side that was built 100% by the government doesn't need to recover any money, has very little toll road, so public perception is very bad because that toll road, which is private, is very expensive. The public one, it's almost free. So there is an inherent problem and conflict in the way these partnerships are structured. That's why, for example, you have two examples in Latin America, which is Colombia and Peru, that changed the model into a concept that is called you pay as you go. The government starts paying for the toll road or for the water facility or the airport as it's being built. So the government does pay for it, and similar to what it is in the case of if they build a road, and then the private sector that built it just charges tolls or fees for the operation, for the production of the water and the operation of the plant, for the maintenance of the toll road plus some profitability. And that makes it much more similar, much more even with the cost of a pure public. So that model clearly has caused much less reaction from the people. So there is a natural conflict that arises from the way you structure these models. And this is something that we have to learn because you that are very young, maybe for us it's a little too late, there is ways to change these things. There is a second conflict, which is the overcharges or the overprice of some of these projects. In average in Latin America, to give you an idea, all PPPs or public infrastructure or private public infrastructure projects have an overprice of around 55%. That means the moment you bid for it, you win that bid, in general, you had to renegotiate those bids. The private sector with the public sector has to renegotiate it because it was delays, etc. Again, if this is an excess cost on the public sector, you don't even realize it. If it's in the private sector or in a partnership with the public sector, it's all over the news. So the population is hearing about these renegotiations of these works or the delays on these works. So also creates an antagonistic. So politically, it's a great target, especially for more extreme left governments to attack this whole model. We should do everything. We should not have the private sector to do it. But again, it's a way of production, of structuring it correctly, pricing it correctly. And I'll give you an idea. If you look, and there is a study by the World Bank and there is a study by the CEPAL, where the overcharge on the public sector, pure public sector projects is around 85%. The overcharge on the private public sector projects is around 21%. So the 55 is the average, but there is a big gap. So in many ways, these PPPs are much more efficient on staying in budget than when it's pure public. But again, that's nothing that gets communicated to the population. So it's a matter of education. So all those things are the things that you have to understand the moment you get into this, because there is always the political, the corruption, many reasons why people attack the concept. But it's necessary. I think it's efficient. We need to do more, not less. And just to give you an example, East Asia invests 7 to 10% in infrastructure. We are talking about, hopefully we can invest 5, and we are investing 2.5. South Asia invests over 5%.
Incredible.
The only country historically over the last 30 years, or only region that invests less than Latin America, has been the Sub-Sahara Africa. And even that, according to McKinsey, in the next 20 or 25 years, should invest more than Latin America because of the Chinese investment into Sub-Sahara Africa. So it's something that you can see it as a glass half empty, which is a problem, or half full is a huge opportunity because there is much more to do.
Thank you. I mean, that was a very, very comprehensive description. I hope you all got it. We're going to quiz you all about all the percentages to make sure. But seriously,
we're not selling a book here.
No, I know. That's going to be the topic of my next book, the percentages of the PPP. So let's see how. But seriously speaking, I think that what Manuel was describing is extremely important, is the gap in understanding the financial model. When you're talking about only the government doing it as a private or both. So if you think about what is involved in this is that if you have a highway that is done under the PPP, then the private sector is building the highway. But then how do you recover your investment? That is the issue that makes it extremely complicated. But what I find fascinating is these gaps in what should be doing and what is actually doing. Because if we don't do it, then we're never going to get that infrastructure. And then I remember going to China for many, many years. And one of the things that I was always worried is when is this country going to pick up on the infrastructure? And then if you go to China, one of the reasons that they are so far ahead in many things is because the incredible investments that they have made in infrastructure. But in Latin America, as we are saying, the gap is humongous. We need a 5%. We are not even half into that. So what do we do? Now, it comes to the next topic, and then why are some countries better prepared for the PPP than others? Let me just give you a statistic. The publication, The Economies, that you all know, they introduce a methodology to see, what countries are better prepared for this. And it's called Evaluating the Environment for Public-Private Partnerships in Latin America and the Caribbean. And they break it down into 5 categories: regulation, institutions, maturity, investment and business climate, and financing. Not surprisingly, not because you're here, Chile is the best country. And then, it happens in many other metrics. Followed by Colombia and Peru. Brazil is number 7, tied with Costa Rica. Uruguay, Mexico is number 10. And the last one, not surprisingly and sadly so at the personal level, is Venezuela. So why are some countries, Argentina, well, let's get into it. Why are some countries better prepared for the PPP than others? What do you think some countries are better prepared than others?
Look, there are many reasons, but I think the most basic reason is the wealthier the country is, the less cost of capital, the less political and economic risk, and therefore every project costs less. Chile is the most economically developed country in the region, in the sense of pays the lowest cost of capital, has the highest percentage of domestic savings, and then Colombia and Peru comes just after that. So it's clearly the wellness, economic wellness, that allows for the public sector to be able to invest more in these projects. That allows to the private sector that needs to discount this cost over time to discount it at a lower rate, and therefore there is less to pay. And it also allows for the governments to create, like Peru and Colombia have done, this I pay you as you start building it because I have the resources to do it. If you don't have the resources to do it, you cannot. You just have to pass the project to the private sector and have them recover the money. I cannot give it to them because I don't have it. So clearly, the big surprise in Venezuela and Argentina are the other extreme for very basic reasons. They have an enormous cost of financing. They have a very disorganized public sector. And therefore, for people to invest there, you discount at a very high rate, and most projects are not even possible to finance. So people don't do those projects very much. The cost of doing them are very high. What is surprising in this whole equation is Mexico. And I don't wanna, because Mexico has the exact characteristic of very similar to Chile, Peru, and Colombia. Has a very low cost of financing, has access to the local capital markets, has a huge Afore system, which is the local pension funds. They have enormous access to the international markets. So Mexico should be a very good environment for PPPs. and partnerships. And that is where the political and all these issues that Pita was mentioning fails. But that is an exception in this rule. The cost of capital and the access to capital and the willingness for people to invest makes a big difference. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Now, are you, the two of you, familiar with any examples of successful PPPs that you have been involved in? I mean, any ideas that you have into PPPs?
I can think of the Parque de Chapultepec, in which I was involved in the initial parts of it. The park was in 2003. It was almost dying. It was full of rats. All the trees were dying because they were too old and nobody replanted. And for politicians, it's not very motivating to spend because they have to plant small trees and that nobody will see until in the next 10 years. So it's not an investment that makes them look that good, you know, in the short term. As it was a very, very complex problem. And so there was business people came and said, you know, we'll invest in it, but the government has to, you know, put a third of it, and we're going to have the Citizens Council. So there's a Citizens Council, and they have intellectuals and people from the media and academicians. And in the other part, you have the business people and the government of the city. And that has worked amazing. Wow. They have very, very good governance. The park is incredible, in the best shape it's ever been. And I think one thing that's important, because governments come and go, they were very, very strict in their contracts, very stronghold contracts. And everybody does their part. They have an amazing leadership. The director is like, she will not let anybody, you know, mess with the park. I think this government, this federal government said, like, we're gonna take some of the budget from the parque to do this and this and this other thing, and they fought it. They went to Supreme Court even. Wow. And they didn't let them do it. So I think that's a very, very good case, you know, and how it worked. And it's worked for 20 years. Wow. So one thing I think is important is, that I just wanted to add is certainty. You know, investors need certainty. Right. And the banks that lend the money for the project, which most of them are 70 or 80%, you know more than me about this, but 70 or 80% of the project is financed for long term. And so they like projects that can offer certainty, you know, and with our political shifts, this can be complicated. And I think the park, with a lot has been spent, a lot of money has been spent in it, but it has been so successful in every sense because they are so, you know, they keep this order and they can offer all the stakeholders, you know, certainty about what the outcome is going to be, what they can expect, and what's going to happen in the next stage. And they have a master plan that goes all the way to 2050. So I think it's a very, very good example, especially like in Mexico, and they have not been able to do anything.
No, it's a good example. I think that you touch on a very important point, and that is the uncertainty. You know, in Latin America, unfortunately, the continuity of governments is not what happened. Chile is the counterexample to that. But in most countries in the region, you know, every time that a new president comes, a new administration, the first thing they do is to stop whatever the previous administration. So it's exactly the opposite of what you're describing, which is the need for certainty. And then this lack of continuity is what many times, you know, it's complicated. If you want to build a highway, you're going to build an airport. It's not that you can do it during your term. So if I cannot do it during my term, then who's going to get the glory of that infrastructure investment? So I'd rather do something that is going to be quick, and then I can
get the motivation. What motivates?
Yes. So there's a deep lack of motivation for the showing up. So you were going to give an example?
No, but what you just said, it's crucial in this process that this goes from administration to administration. Any of these projects are very long-term projects. And there is where the multilaterals in Latin America play a big role. The IFC, the IDB, the MIGA as an insurance for political risk. So if you look at the history of PPPs in Latin America, concessions. And again, PPP is a complicated thing because some people put concessions or not within the PPP. But it is, it's in general, the example of projects that have been committed and has been done, in general, they follow the rules. So Latin America, in that sense, has changed few rules. There are exceptions now with López Obrador in Mexico, that even though the airport wasn't a PPP, there was a private construction company hired to do that. He decided to use it as part of his campaign. He stopped it. So this gives a very bad message to the rest of the people because, or any private sector, because they said, no, look, if he does that with the airport, I'm not going to get involved. But in general, countries like Chile has had a very stable, from administration to administration, to continue with the projects that the prior ones started. So you get the benefits of some of the ones you started, the benefit from the ones before, and people have respected that. The same in Peru, the same in Colombia. What in Peru changed substantially was one, and most probably you have heard, which has to do with the corruption area, which is Odebrecht. Odebrecht is the largest construction company in Brazil, was the largest in all Latin America, was doing projects everywhere, and there were huge corruption issues. And there is before Odebrecht in Peru and after Odebrecht in Peru. There is before López Obrador in Mexico and after, and hopefully that will change. But there are political reasons why this changed. Now, examples are hundreds. In fact, Isabella, I was mentioning it to somebody before. When I started working at Citibank, one of our first roles was project financing for many of these PPPs. We were financing as a bank many of these projects because they need financing. So look, Latin America, even though the numbers seem small, there are lots of projects. To give you an idea, between 2019 and 2021, just Brazil had almost 80 or 90 projects in PPP. So there is a lot of projects being done in every country till today. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller. I'll give you one very close to my heart. We develop buildings that we rent, and this is residential for rent buildings in Mexico, Peru, Colombia, and different countries. And the prior government, both Calderón in Mexico and Peña Nieto, created an entity that is called Sociedad Hipotecaria Federal, which is an entity to help finance some of these buildings, because part of it you finance through the public sector. And why they were doing that is because Mexico had a whole city plan which they were building big populations or big areas of people living on the suburbs. And those suburbs became so difficult to come to your work that you could take 2 or 3 hours to go from your home to your work, and with enormous cost of infrastructure for the city to move all these people in and out. Imagine you spend 4 or 5 hours a day just going back and forth to your job. So the governments of Calderón and Peña Nieto said, let's motivate or let's incentivize people to build these buildings close to where people work. So we are doing that. López Obrador comes and he decides to eliminate that. That goes away. So there is no that financing. There is still bank financing, but in some way the public sector was subsidizing it to make it quicker, so more projects gets done. So all those things are happening to some extent, some success or less success, but there are hundreds of examples in which you can see that you can do this type of projects.
There is a very important takeaway in the things in the examples that you gave, and there are 2 variables that when I listen to you, I realize that are the sources of the complexity. One is the amount of money we're talking about. I mean, these are not cheap projects. These are projects that require an incredible amount of funding, and that's why it's extremely important to have the multilateral organizations to participate, because, you know, the private sector by itself will not be enough to fund these things because of the magnitude. I mean, you're adding zeros to any type of project that we're talking about. So that by itself requires a third player in this, is the public is the private, but hey, multilaterals. And that is why we have the World Bank. That's why we have the IDB. I mean, the IDB, not many people understand. Why are they there? Well, because they give funding for this type of projects. But the idea then is, okay, how do we manage the project? That's where the PPs get involved. They get the funding with the way of operating from the private sector to serve a public.
Yeah, and that point, let's understand why they have a role to play. Because the IDB, World Bank, IFC, etc., they finance themselves very cheaply. So rather than financing 100% of the project, if 30% of the project can be financed by the IFC or any of these institutions at very low prices, as you can imagine, the cost of the whole project goes down. Therefore, the tolls go down, the fees that you have to charge for the extra cost of the water goes down, the airport fees goes down. So in many ways, these multilaterals are really helping this partnership to succeed and make it more efficient. There is then some of them that provide guarantees. Guarantees because some investors are very concerned about the political risk, the corruption risk. So there is an entity called MIGA, which is part of the multilaterals, that they provide the political risk. So if by any chance your project gets desauthorized by a new government, they will respond to the private sector. So whenever you build it, you don't ask for such a high return whenever you are building the project. So it's all economics at the end.
And actually, that's why we have an entire chapter in the book talking about the PPPs, because there, the way you were describing is a clear situation where you're going from the shareholder to the stakeholder. Who are the stakeholders involved? When the multilateral finances this at a low interest rate, it's not because they want to maximize their return. It's because they're helping a much larger ecosystem, which could not be done unless you are under this framework. So that is something very important, that element that we should be factoring in. How can we make, because countries need to sell themselves to the multilateral organizations, invest in us. Because, we want to have access to your money in a project, but then for that, you need to demonstrate that you have the capacity, like Chile has done, of continuity, which is the second variable that I was mentioning. One is the amount of money, but the other one, which is very critical, is that the lead times, the time it takes from the moment you conceptualize the idea until you finally deliver it, is too long. So how do we create one thing you were saying before, the continuity, the lack of more certainty rather than uncertainty? And those two elements make the whole process more complicated. So if we truly embrace the notion of from me to we, then hopefully, this will be more successful. Am I selling the point too much of the book? No. So, I'm going to send a copy to each person.
The book.
Yeah. You see, it's good.
But I think you're making it very clear that the private sector has an interest in finishing the project in certain time. In 18 months, if they said 18 months, they really have the incentive to finish in 18 months. Whereas if the government builds it, it can take 4 or 5 years, changing contract, the friend or the government changes, and now they want another contractor. Mm-hmm. So that gives it more certainty too, in that way.
Good.
And I think one part that I have to tell you about Chile, it's not revenge or anything, but a friend of mine was building hospitals in Chile, and he said that the last government, they built them about 7 years ago, 4 hospitals, and that the previous president said, okay, it stopped at 3%. You can only make 3% profit in it. And so what happened was not any more hospitals were being built. They said, I'm not going to participate. And now they changed that again. And so it's so hard when you do that. Or when you say, like in Mexico, they built prisons, a private company built prisons, and now they said, okay, we're going to have a 20% discount on what we have to pay you every month. Why or how? This is not in my financial planning, and they just did it. They just did it. So what's going to happen? They're not going to keep on building, and you need the hospitals, you need the prisons, you need the roads, and one thing that I also found interesting is sometimes when they plan for the roads, they say so many people are going to go from, I don't know, Mexico to Acapulco. And 2 years after that, they say a lot less people are using the toll road, you know. So can we please extend our concession?
Right.
So you need to be sure that they have the flexibility. So it's so complex, you know, all the financial runs and everything make it so complex. But it is an amazing vehicle, I think.
Yeah, I think that is a true commitment to something that goes beyond you. Exactly. You know, and that's a difficult part.
And it's a true commitment, not only the willingness to do it, but also the way you structure all these programs. That flexibility has to exist. You never know exactly how many people will go through that toll road or how much water they will be bought. And based on that, you have to give flexibility that you might extend the period. Not to charge more per person that goes through, you have to extend the period to recover the money. And the same if there is more. The airport in Santiago was a very successful one. There is much more traffic than was originally planned, and they are already concessioning a new aisle. Before it was, part of the contract was you cannot build a new area of the airport until I pay all my sunk costs. And it was so quickly gone down in terms of price that immediately they have allowed another part of the airport because you need it. So if you have a very good model, not politicized, but just based on economics, I think you have a very good partnership. And one of the models that people have been talking, the way Latin America despoliticized the central banks is by making them very independent, independent of the politician in turn. If you get a PPP type organization, like the PPI in Brazil. There is called PPI, the one that organizes all these partnerships in Brazil. And you make it that the government every year cannot change all the members, can only change 2 or 3. And therefore, any change in government, you don't change the administration of all this program, would make a great service to the countries. As you can imagine, the governments don't want that. They want to control everything, what is done or what is not. But if you put some independence on the entities that rule all these projects, believe me, you reduce the cost, you have much more projects, etc. And that's something, an idea that have been floating around. So how to make it? And again, it's difficult. I'm not used to talk to students. I'm used to talk to people that are more similar to what I do.
You know why that happened to it? Because it was insulting you that he's talking to a student. You know, it's a shining star.
It's much more relevant talking to you because you can go back there and you can make a difference. When I talk to people like me, it's like it's a little late. Yeah, we can provide ideas, but we are late in our lives. So it's you that can make a difference and bring these ideas back into the region.
Actually, this is an important message. I think that you guys believe in it. I mean, you don't need us telling you. As I mentioned before, I deeply believe that your generation is a generation that embraces these concepts. But you know, in Latin America, which is to a certain extent different, one of the elements that I would like to comment on is the continuity of institutions. You know, the institutions in our countries, in Latin America, are very fragile. The institutions are not solid. The institutions go up and down. And then, you know, at the end of the day, you need the solid institutions, not only in the judicial system, but also in the business system. And then in our countries, because that is so fragile, then it introduces the element you mentioned before, which is there is a lot of uncertainty. And then how can we make it? Then one suggestion is by asking them to participate in the process. They should be part of the solution and then taking care of all that. So any comments on the institutions? What Chile is a very good example of continuity. Mexico is the counterexample in the institutions, but overall it's important.
What Peter was saying is right. Chile has changed. Chile, there was a lot of continuity, but now people have voted for changes, major changes. I believe that they're not going to be good for the country, but major changes. And part of it is diluted those very strong institutions. That's the last thing you need to lose. You need a democracy, you need strong institutions, You need the division of powers. If you destroy that and you have a dictator or you have somebody that controls everything, it's a problem. And I believe Latin America, again, we can have, or we can see the glass half full or half empty. For you, it's an opportunity, but there is clearly a lot to do to improve those institutions in Latin America.
I would like to open it to you guys so you can ask questions from our panelists. This is an opportunity for you to really explore. I think that there are microphones, just stand up, tell us who you are. If you happen to be Chilean, then let us know, because it might show some kind of a bias in your questioning. So, I'm just have I'm guessing you're Chilean. I don't know.
I am.
You?
I am.
Oh my God. I'm going to go to Vegas from here. I guessed that he was Chilean. How did that happen?
Yes, I'm Chilean. My name is Ignacio. I'm from the GCL program for this year. Well, I'm sorry for making this strengthening PPPs in Chile instead of Latin America, but my question is about Chile. Well, you were talking a lot about my country, and this is not the first time I heard what Manuel said. Yesterday, Hector Chamis and Jose Luis Daza were talking in a presentation by the Americas Institute, where they said that their certainty in my country was basically gone, and gave us a pretty bleak picture of what we should expect for next years. And so with that continuity basically thrown out of the window by our country, and for example, one important point of information relating to PPPs is that the 2% of infrastructure investment is expected to drop. I mean, a drop in 2% of an investment in infrastructure in our country, and the main reason is because 20% of private investment in infrastructure is going to go away because of political uncertainty. And so it looks like in Chile we're basically going back to a from we to me model instead of what you're proposing in the book.
That's the appendix of the book. What happens when you go from we to me?
Yeah, what happens? So my question is actually, how can companies continue to work with a model like from me to we among this political uncertainty? Because in Latin America, political uncertainty is like the rule of land, and the case of Chile was basically an exception. It's not anymore. And so we used to have this thing when
Yes.
one government announced a project, the other built it, and the third one cut the ribbon, and there was a pretty clear line between those three. That didn't matter what political sector it was, what Congress did we have, but that's not true anymore. So how can the private sector work within those rules and keep having or keep working to strengthen PPPs and keep incentivizing a stakeholder mentality, etc. So how do you work in a scenario like that?
I'll give you my answer. Then I'm going to let them answer. You know how you do that? And the best way of doing it is by people like you. You are the one that needs to do it. And you know why? Because if it's not you, who? If it's not now, when? So you are the one that should be doing this. You should be taking these positions and not letting the lack of continuity affecting the whole process. By you taking those jobs and helping the PPPs, then hopefully all this is going to get better. So you, by assuming you GCLs here, taking the responsibility of going back to your countries and fixing the situation and embracing truly the me to we, then things probably going to get better. Because remember, if it's not you, who? And if it's not now, when? But I'm going to let them just answer the question as well.
Yeah, Chile has had a successful, it's not the most successful model in Latin America over the last few years. Meaning, if you take it over 30-year period, it is. But over the last 10 or 15, no. Peru, Colombia have had more successful, as percentage of GDP in terms of investment. Colombia had immense success with the 1G, yes. 2G, up to 5G, True. Which were all roads. But then they did a lot of other things. Remember, Colombia, because of the war with the drug cartels, because of all the issues with the paramilitaries, they clearly did not invest in infrastructure for a very long time, they have catch up very quickly. And Peru has also invested more than Chile over the last few years. Even Brazil is investing now more than Chile.
True.
So look, I don't want to stay here and believe that Chile is a perfect country. Now, Chile is clearly doing things to worsen situations. It's weakening the institutions, it's changing the constitution, so private sector doesn't know what the new rules will be, so until those are clarified, nobody will invest, or very few people are willing to invest. The government have demonized in some way or another the private sector as a partner, and therefore that reduces the capability or willingness for investors to invest there. Hasn't stopped altogether, but clearly is suffering. Now, it's all about strengthening institutions, and again, you have a role to play there. It's getting away the political noise and look into the factual aspects, putting good models that will succeed rather than having models of concessions that the toll roads will be so expensive for people to go through them that is a fact that is not going to be liked and it's not going to be used because it's too expensive. You may have the best road in the world, but if it's too expensive to go through it through a toll, you will go through the alternative ones. That in most of these countries, that's the way it works. You have the toll road, which is the new one that it takes you an hour to go through, and then you have the mountain roads that are still there that it takes you 2.5 or 3 hours, but some people don't have a choice because they cannot pay for the toll. Those are the things you have to avoid. You cannot perpetuate the problem. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, I hope.
I think one thing that worked for us is the ownership. If you make them feel that it's their project, like we needed hospitals very, very badly in our region, and we told them, your hospital that we can build here, starting like that, and make them feel it's theirs, and it's their idea, and have them, come see it. You have to see if you like it. Do you like the project? Work on the project. I think that makes it a lot easier. If they, like ownership, like you were talking about, is so important. Because if they say, their building, that hospital is theirs, it doesn't work as good. No, it has to be theirs. I mean, for you, as long as you have the hospital and people are being taken care of, I think that can make a difference.
No, I'm glad you mentioned it, because that's exactly what we talk about. I mean, it's when you can put the hospital there, that's okay. But then they should feel the ownership, and they should be accountable for how the upkeep of the hospital. And then by doing that, they have a higher level of loyalty, they're healthier, because you have a hospital not only for them, but for their families. So it's an entire process that closes the loop of full share responsibility. So we are all sharing the responsibility of the final objective.
And the timing, I think what helped us too was it was COVID. There were no hospital beds, so the timing was right. That's why they collaborated. That's what they were able to sign and everything. So, and they were, when they said, so it's ours too. Yes, it is, of course.
Of course.
And we went ahead and we were able to build those hospitals.
Great, thank you. Questions?
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Fabricio from Ecuador, and we are very glad to be here. Ricardo, thank you very much for creating this space for all of us. And I have a question in the context of your book, of what you taught us about what the concept of from me to it. I think it's very interesting, all your metrics and everything about creating value. And also, I can't forget your class about globalization, competitiveness, and
Governability.
Okay. So the thing is, what tech businesses that were born in little markets, such as the Ecuadorian, can do in order to scale? Start from scratch in bigger markets, show the traction, reach it, and look for investors. Despite the ones I have spoken to have said they are not interested in small markets, and that I should look for local, and that I should look for local investment, which clearly do not exist in my country. advice can you give for all tech entrepreneurs trying to create global businesses?
Well, let me just react to your thing. One of the very important components is the distinguishing what is the short term versus the long term. And then if everything you do is driven by short-term results and short-term returns, then it's a completely different approach than when you're thinking medium or long-term. So, and that is a commitment that you need to make to a place, it's a commitment that you need to make to a country, and then that is where, by putting the country ahead of you, then you're willing to commit more to the long term rather than the short term. And that is what we're trying to say. Now, this is not myopic and this is not like being naive, because the bottom line is that if you really make this commitment, eventually you will end up making more money than in any other situation. So it's just the continuity of the whole thing. It's the planning horizon that we would like for people to reconsider, reevaluate, and how do they look at the entire picture? Is in a completely different framework. In the framework is the timing, and then there are many, many examples about what different industries, different levels of risk. So Latin America, because there's such a high risk in everything you do, then most people expect a very short return, time for the return. I mean, if you are coming to the Scandinavian countries or to the US, you're willing to invest longer. So I think that we need to make the commitment so the planning horizons are expanded in such a way that by embracing this, hopefully, we'll win. So it's a win-win for everybody. That is my way of reacting to these elements of return.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm a freshman here at Georgetown.
What is your last name again?
Sophia Ernst.
Is there any
I don't think we've met before.
Are you related to the professor?
No.
That's what I thought.
It's a completely separate family. Anyways, first of all, thank you so much for this presentation. It was a great opportunity for specifically my generation to learn more on this topic. But I have a question regarding corruption. I was wondering, what are the Latin American countries doing to fight corruption? Specifically, if you could give me an example of what the governments are doing either in Mexico or in Chile or in other Latin American countries. But yeah, thank you.
Look, corruption is a big issue. It's an issue on the private sector, it's an issue on the public sector, so it's not like monopolized from one side to another. Part of that is education, and one of the projects we have in the Georgetown, the Americas Institute, is to train people, and there is a program that Ricardo runs that to train people that are in government and train people that are in private sector. Some of them are here now from one course, and giving them the tools to understand the right and the wrong, good private policy, wrong private policy, and a lot of skills. But again, it's education. It's of course you have to invest in justice systems that are independent from the current government. It has to be, a democracy has an independent justice. Some countries in Latin America have failed miserably, where the government controls the justice system. So that independence, and it has to be worked on. I don't have a solution for the countries that is not working. Some countries are working better than the other, but we have to invest on that. And transparency. The more you let the system to have everything seen by everybody. How is the auction being done? It's not behind a corridor where nobody knows. It's a public auction, that you have 5 different bidders. You open the envelopes in a public way. So look, what I'm saying is very basic, but believe it or not, in many cases it's not applied in some of these countries. And look, it's hard to talk about these things because for many of you it looks like it's very basic, but it's not happening. Where the difference you can make as you go back to these countries is fight for those basic principles, fight for independent justice systems, fight for transparency both in the private and the public sector, and I think that's you advance a lot. I'll give you one example that
it was done in my country very early on. There was a lot of corruptions on the customs system. And you were coming into the country with your bags, and you had to pay whomever is the custom officer, because that way they wouldn't check it. And suddenly they just put a system which you tap a button. You don't have to talk to anybody. If it's green, you pass. If it's red, you don't pass. You eliminate the corruption immediately, and clearly it's not liked by the corrupted officials that were there, but it's a system. And you can make these systems more automatic, more transparent, more technology being used into it. And in almost everything you see in the system, you can do it. You can ask more transparency on the corporate disclosures of the companies. You can ask for more disclosure on every action of the government. Now, if the government decides to hide things and not to show it and do it behind their back, there is little to do.
Very good.
I would just add that, sadly, like in Mexico, for 12 years, we had the red and the green, and you would only stop if you got red. And they just got rid of those. So now you have a person that's you and you and you, and you need to pay so and so. And so sometimes we just get so frustrated because we're back, to where we were 30 years ago, for example. And it's unbelievable. In Mexico, it's happening. So what happened to all the cameras they installed, 2 years ago in all the streets? They're all gone. What happened? Nobody, there's no accountability. Who's responsible for that? And so it is very frustrating. But I think with technology, we can do it, and that's going to help a lot. And there has to be consequences. What happens? The incentives to be corrupt are there because nothing happens if you're corrupt. That's one thing that we need to change, and society needs to be, on it, just what was it, demanding consequences for people that are caught, doing something or charging to do a service or to get a contract, and it's incredible. Like the part I was telling you about the one of the jails that they built. They were saying they had these judges sending, because they get paid for every inmate that they send to the jails that are built by the private sector. So the judges would send people to certain jails and not to other ones. Wow. So the people that built the newer ones were like, all the inmates are, going to the other jails. And so you find it everywhere. And in, like, for example, in all our major projects that we have now in Mexico, the Tren Maya and what happened to the airport, it's big corruption. And we just have to fight it, start again and start where we left off. And because there's a direct correlation between corruption and misery in countries. Yes. The higher the corruption, the higher the level of misery. And that is very, very sad.
Yeah. Corruption puts a huge tax on the development of any country. Corruption also is correlated with education. We have to have, and that's part of also the PPPs, education. We need to educate our people better, and if we educate them better, believe me, there is different ways that people start doing things. So this is not a battle, this is a war. You have to fight in many areas in order to win this war. And sorry, I'm using the word in these days, which we shouldn't. But it's really something that you have to work in many areas in order to improve this. It's education, it's transparency, it's justice system that is just, is ways to do this automatized, not by an official person that can decide if you get the permit or don't get the permit, or if you pass or don't pass. These cameras that shows you exactly what happens, and there is the technology there. The issue is then the willingness of the governments or the people to use them.
I don't want to finish this on this sad and depressing tone. You see, we are corrupt. We're going to die. It's the end of the world. Can we have some words of wisdom? This is the generation of the future. We are depending on the shining stars here. So can you give some words of wisdom to my people here?
Look,
Yeah,
I
the two of
believe
you are leaving. I need to stay here with them.
the natural course of life is convergence. As these countries go down and they diverge from developed economies in many ways, I think the opportunity for all of you is to work on that convergence. So the opportunity for Latin America, for many of the emerging markets, to grow more than the developed market is there and has happened for long periods of time. Now we are going through a period that is not happening. Latin America was one of the countries that suffered the most in terms of reduction in GDP during the COVID time, and now it's growing the least. But that creates an opportunity because there is a lot to do. And believe me, these cycles change, and there is going to be good opportunities created. And that makes, again, you can see this as a half full or half empty glass. I think you are at an age that you should see it as a half full, and there is a big way to work to make it full.
Half full and fill it up. That's the message. Pita, final
Yes.
words of wisdom.
I do see private-public partnerships playing a central role in the development of our countries. And I'm excited by the prospect of greater private sector participation in solving all the problems that we have. And it's good, we're going to do it through them.
Good. I'm happy to hear. Well, guys, join me. We have been very fortunate and privileged to have the company of these two with us.